How many of you are 100% ready for Christmas? Let me see a show of hands. All the kids put their hands up. I don't mean 100% ready to open all your presents. I mean 100% ready as in all the gifts have been purchased, all the decorations are up, all the meal plans have been set, travel arrangements made. Anyone? 100%? I see one or two people. Weirdos. How many of you are like 90% there? Like you just have maybe a couple more gifts to purchase? Yeah, I see a few more hands, 90%. How many of you know that in exactly, what do we have, a couple of weeks, let's say the 24th, what's that, like 18 days? 18 days from now, you are in serious trouble because that's the way it always goes for you, right? A few more hands. How many of you guys know that on the 24th, you're going to be traipsing all around town trying to find the perfect gift for your wife? You don't have any idea what to get her. She says it doesn't matter, but you know that it really matters, right? Anybody like that? A few more hands went up. The honesty is impeccable. Christmas is here, right? It's here. It's December. It's not here, but it feels like it's here because it's coming so fast. There's nothing that we can do to slow down the calendar or slow down the clock. It's going to be here in just a matter of weeks. Now, kids, I know those of you who are kids that are getting school here, like you're pretty pumped about Christmas, right? How many kids are pumped and excited about Christmas? Yeah, can I hear you? I can't really see you. Can I hear? All right. Now, you got holidays coming up and all the Christmas stuff. What are some of the things that you look forward to the most about Christmas? Just shout it out. Presents, holidays, time off from school. What else? I was talking to the kids, and that was my kid that said rum, but it was my adult kid that said rum, okay? Pastors' kids. Even when they're adults, they're still pastors' kids. Any of you other kids, what are some other things that you're looking forward to? We got presents, we got time away. Any of you going to see like cousins or grandparents? Anybody? Yeah, see a few hands going up. That's exciting stuff. Yeah, I know. Christmas is a lot of fun. And if you're a kid, it is one of the most exciting times of the year. Now, it is that time of year where, everywhere we go and everything that we tune into, we kind of have this bombardment of like rainbows and lollipops and gumballs, right? It's like the whole world is like telling us that, this is the most wonderful time of year. Every commercial that you see on TV or all the Christmas specials that you watch are telling you that, this is the year that everything is going to come together. Everything is going to be perfect. This is the year that you're finally going to get that Red Ryder BB gun, right? This will be the year. The perfect gift, the thing that you've been waiting for all these years. Or this will finally be the year that you'll get that bonus check from your boss so that you can put a pool in the backyard, right? Or this will finally be the year that your dad will stop ignoring you and pushing his whole agenda of selling bad children's books and actually give you the love and attention that you deserve even though you've been living in the North Pole for the last 40 years and he doesn't even know you exist, right? This is that time of year. Some of you, for this time of year, this is the time of year that you are secretly, quietly praying that everyone will just leave you all alone. Yeah, some of you can relate to that. Seriously, though, it's a time of year when we do have a tendency to get nostalgic. I love that word. I love that concept of nostalgia. In our minds, there are certain things that just simply have to happen at Christmas in order for it to be really Christmas, right? Maybe it's the right treat that you get to eat, or the right Christmas special that you get to watch on TV, or the right trip that you get to take, the right family members that you get to visit, the right songs that you get to sing. There's just certain things that just your Christmas won't be Christmas unless you have those things. Like if you're over 20 or 25 years old, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You have those certain things. For me, it's my mom's pecan pie. Like I just associate my mom's pecan pie with Christmas. We had 3 pecan trees in my yard when I was a kid growing up, massive, massive pecan trees. And all through the fall, my brother and I would pick up pecans. We would get paid to pick up pecans. And then at Christmas time, after my grandfather had done the duty of shucking all those pecans, my mom would make the most wicked pecan pies. Now, she still makes wicked pecan pies today, but not from the same trees, and I don't have to pick up all the pecans. I just get the benefit of her baking. But Christmas for me is not Christmas without my mom's pecan pie. If you're a youngster, if you're a kid, you're still living with your parents, a lot of the things that you experience now at Christmas time, the things that you enjoy the most, are the things that when you're an adult, when you're married, when you have your own family, it's going to be those things that you long for. Right now we look around, not just in this room, but in our whole community and in our homes, there's lights everywhere. There's trees everywhere. There's decorations everywhere. More than likely, you've done some things to your house that you wouldn't ordinarily do to your house, right? For some of you, your basement has literally thrown up in your living room, right? Some of you can relate to that. You've got trees up and lights up and stockings hanging. You've got your TV, your Telus TV, like tuned to the little fireplace channel. It's just fireplace and Christmas songs all the time. Any of you doing that yet? No, it's still too warm outside for the whole real fireplace, so maybe we'll just watch the fireplace on TV. You know, we're going to hit December 26th in just a few weeks. And all of this stuff that surrounds us is all going to start to fade out, right? The lights are going to go off. If they don't go off, they're going to start to be turned off. They won't be on as frequently. Eventually, we're going to hit that New Year's date, and things are going to start to get back to normal. And for you, normal may not necessarily be the best place to be. Like your normal might just be a bit inconvenient right now. Maybe your normal right now is that you've got some relationship issues that you need to deal with, and the holidays are giving you an excuse to kind of avoid those things. Maybe your normal is that you're unemployed, and you're struggling trying to figure out a way to get through the Christmas season, but come the first week of January, you got to get back to the job hunt. You got to get back to trying to find work. For some of you, your kids, maybe your normal is that you're bullied at school. Maybe you've got a bully that's just tormenting you and making life very difficult for you. Or maybe you're struggling in your classes at school and you're just looking forward to the Christmas break so that you don't have to deal with the stress of school. But eventually, January rolls around and we've got to get back to normal. Now, what we want to do here at Grasslands for the next 3 Sundays, today and 2 more weeks, is we want to intentionally engage this space on our calendar as people who follow Jesus by recognizing that while the Christmas season kind of comes and goes, and there are a lot of things that we do during the Christmas season that are relatively temporary, there are actually things about God that have always been there, and they will always be there regardless of the time of year, regardless of whether it's Christmas or not. Come Boxing Day, come New Year's, come all those resolutions that you're going to probably set and then fail at by the 3rd week of January. All this new stuff and all this different stuff, it's going to start to fade away. But there are some truths, some things about God that will never, ever change. It's okay if we get trees. It's okay if we get into the Christmas spirit. It's okay if we exchange gifts. Let's sing carols. Let's, drink hot chocolate or whatever it is, rum, if that's your beverage over the holidays. Let's do the things that we need to do to kind of give us those temporary warm fuzzies. There's nothing wrong with that. But let's also take time during this season to lean our hearts towards those things that aren't going to go away on December 26th. Those things that will always be true for us, those of us who have placed our faith in Jesus and have committed our lives to following him. Let's not get swept away by the commercialization of the holiday. Let's not get swept away by the nostalgia and our family traditions. Let's not get swept away by the sheer busyness of it all. But let's take some time to lift our eyes towards God. We're going to meet here for an hour and a bit for the rest of this month, and we're going to sing some carols. We're going to eat some amazing treats. Can I get a little yee-haw on the treats that were out there at the coffee table this morning? Keep coming back. There's more of that coming. Whole month. I can't promise you what's going to happen. In January, it's going to go back to normal. Sorry. But hey, for the next couple of weeks, there's some good stuff that you can have out there. Let's do those things. In fact, I've even heard rumor that we might have a special guest showing up here at the Galaxy Cinemas next Sunday. Fat guy, red suit. I'm going to leave it at that. But you got to be here if you want to see, right? But, you know what? If we could, with a laser-like focus, let's get into the historic Christmas story as it was originally documented in the Gospels of the Bible. And let's draw out some of the vintage elements that we read. Perhaps if we do that, it'll help us stay grounded, not just through the Christmas season, but it'll help us stay grounded beyond into the new year, hopefully all year round. Now, to refer to something as vintage is to say that it's old. And that means that some of you here are vintage. Did you notice the vintage drummer we had playing down here front? Oh, no, wait. Vintage doesn't just mean old. Vintage means old and of superior quality. So now some of you are volunteering to be vintage, right? All right, yeah, I get it, right? So what we're going to do here over the course of this series is we're going to look at some vintage characteristics of God. They are old. In fact, they're so old they're eternal. They never didn't exist. And certainly because they're characteristics or qualities of God, they're superior. And so through the lens of the Bible today, we're going to look at God's vintage compassion. Since we still got a couple of weeks until the baby Jesus actually arrives, what we're going to do is look at some text from the Bible today that gives us a little bit of a prequel to the actual Christmas story. When the gospel writer Luke wrote down his account of the Christmas story, he included some details that I think are really important for us to understand, to grasp, so that we know exactly what God was doing behind the scenes when Jesus actually did arrive in that manger. We're going to take a look this morning at Luke chapter 1, beginning at verse 5. The text is going to be all up on the screen for you here. When Herod was king of Judea, there was a Jewish priest named Zechariah. He was a member of the priestly order of Abijah, and his wife Elizabeth was also from the priestly line of Aaron. Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes, careful to obey all the Lord's commandments and regulations. They had no children because Elizabeth was unable to conceive, and they were both very old. Now, most of us, when we go to the Christmas story, when we think about the Christmas story, it almost always starts with Mary and Joseph, right? That's kind of where our minds go. But Luke actually introduces us first to not a young couple, but an old couple. Mary and Joseph were a young couple. This is an old couple named Zechariah and Elizabeth. And I want to give you their bio. Zechariah is a priest. He's from a long line of priests. His dad was a priest. His dad's dad was a priest. He has a very long religious history in his family. And he's married to this woman named Elizabeth, who it says is from the line of Aaron. Aaron was Moses' brother, and he was the very first priest. And so that infers that Elizabeth also is from a very long line of priests. Her father would have been a priest, her grandfather would have been a priest, and so on. So together, Zechariah and Elizabeth have a very religious heritage. Not only that, but verse 6 actually tells us that they are righteous in the sight of God. Listen to this. It says, they were careful to obey all of the Lord's commandments and regulations. All of them. Not many of us in this room, if any of us in this room, can make that claim, right? That we obey all of God's commandments. I mean, this is pretty remarkable. Zechariah and Elizabeth aren't attributed with following some of God's commandments or most of God's commandments, but all of his commandments. So this couple is a righteous couple. Like this is a power church couple. This is the kind of couple that if they were in our church, we'd all want to be in their community group because they've set the bar. They set the bar for what it means to be awesome people. But Zechariah and Elizabeth have no children, no kids. And the text actually says that they have no child because Elizabeth is barren. And they are old. They're vintage, no doubt. This is the part of the story that for Luke's original readers would have been very confusing. It would have been a head-scratching part of the story because he's just laid out for us that these people, this couple, are about as close to being godly as a person could be. But the fact that they have no child actually seems to infer the opposite. The fact that Elizabeth is barren actually speaks a different word to the people of their days. In the ancient Near East, and certainly in the traditions of Judaism, the inability to bear a child was actually seen as a curse from God. The natural assumption would have been that the reason they can't have kids is that they have some sort of sin in their life and that God is withholding the blessing of a child from them because of this sin. So we have this tension in Zechariah and Elizabeth's lives as they are seen by God as being godly people because they follow his rules, they follow his commandments and his regulations, yet everyone in their community, everyone in their village would have seen them as suspect. Everyone would have said, you know what, on the outside, they look like they got it all together, but there must be something going on inside the four walls of their home since God hasn't blessed them with a child. And so you can imagine that this would have led their lives to being full of all kinds of uncomfortable and awkward conversations, right? You know, Zechariah is out at work, you know, doing his priestly thing at the local synagogue, and everybody's like, what, Zechariah, where's your son? Why don't you have a kid? He's like, I don't know. We just don't have one. Hey, Elizabeth, where's your children? Where's your son that's going to carry on your family's name and your family's lineage of being priests? And she's like, we don't have any children. Definitely no son. Well, why? What'd you do? We didn't do anything. We're good. No, seriously, Elizabeth, like really, what's going on? What have you done? Why is God, cursing you this way? She said, no, really, we're faithful. And so you can imagine this tension. You can imagine this discomfort that they would have had to endure their entire life. And yet, it's in this tension, in the hurt that they would have been experiencing, in this trial that God is putting them through, that he's going to show up and he's going to throw down some vintage compassion. God determines that Elizabeth and Zechariah, even in their old age, in the waning years of their lives, are going to be the parents of a boy who's going to grow up, and Jesus is actually going to refer to their son as the greatest man ever born to a woman. That's what Jesus is going to say about their son. That's saying a lot, don't you think? Now, Zechariah's order of priests, it's his unit, the group that he serves with, they get called up to serve a week at the temple in Jerusalem. And while he's there, his name gets drawn to be the priest who enters the holy place to light incense while the people are praying. Now, as a priest, Zechariah's life would have basically been, he lived in a small country village, and so his ministry would have been to minister to the small town country folk. But twice per year, his unit or his order of priests would go to the big city of Jerusalem, and they would spend a week there serving at the temple. And every day, twice per day, lots would be drawn to see who the priest was that would go into the temple to burn the incense. Now, there are 24 orders of priests and an estimated 700 priests in each order. You can quickly do the math in your head, or you can save it for later. But there's a lot of priests, right? There's a lot of priests. And so the fact that on this particular day, Zechariah's name gets drawn, the text actually says that they draw lots. So in essence, Zechariah has won the lottery. This is not an everyday occurrence for Zechariah to go into the temple to burn the incense. In fact, he's been a priest for many, many years, most of his adult life, if not all of his adult life, and we know that he's an old man. And it's likely that this could have been the very first time that he even had the opportunity to go into the holy place to burn the incense. Even if it wasn't his first time, it wasn't an everyday occurrence. So this was a very unaverage day for him. And as he goes into the holy place to burn the incense, the day is about to get even more unaverage, because while he's in this place all alone, the angel Gabriel shows up and tells him that he and his wife Elizabeth are going to have a child. And he basically responds by saying, "Nuh-uh, because she's so old. Ain't going to happen." Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm someplace, any place, and an angel shows up to me and starts talking, I'm going to, if I don't have a heart attack or poop my pants first, I'm going to take everything that angel says and I'm going to the bank with it. Like in our minds, we picture angels as being like those little cheruby things or the like little precious moments, Christmas ornaments. But angels are described in the Bible as being like massive, fierce warrior creatures. So this is like big, scary dude that shows up and says, "Zechariah, you're going to have a child." And he says, "No, we're not." Argues with God's angel. I think what Zechariah was having a difficult time getting his head around was the fact that he'd been praying for so long for a son, and he'd given up. He'd given up on that prayer. You know, it's not difficult to imagine that Zechariah's frustration about not being able to have a child had turned into discouragement. And eventually that discouragement had probably turned to devastation. And he'd pretty much given up. He didn't give up on God, but he gave up on that prayer. But we see God's compassion even in this, that God shows up to answer a prayer that Zechariah had long stopped praying, a prayer that he'd long stopped believing. He no longer believed that God was going to answer that prayer. But God's compassion and his sovereignty intersect in this moment to perform a miracle that Zechariah, in spite of his faithfulness, because he was a faithful man, but in spite of his faithfulness, Zechariah had stopped believing that God could or would do this for him. And then we get Elizabeth's response in verse 25. When she realizes she's pregnant, she says, "How kind the Lord is. He has taken away my disgrace of having no children." Just think about all the years that Elizabeth had prayed for a child. Think of all the years that she had hoped to have a baby. God, in his compassion, in the last years of her life, opens her womb to give her this blessing. Think about all the days that she would have come home from the market, from the synagogue, and all those awkward conversations that she would have had with people, and yet she would probably come into her home and close herself up and just weep and mourn. She was discouraged. She was devastated. She was hurt. She was confused. She felt inadequate. And the text tells us here that she has spent the better part of her life feeling disgraced. Can you imagine that? And then God, in his compassion, shows up. He says, "You know what, Elizabeth, I hear your prayers. I see your hurt. I haven't given up on you, but you've got to wait for my timing. Because when we wait on God's timing, good things are likely to happen." Zechariah and Elizabeth had given up. They had been overtaken by the darkness of their situation. But the darkest hour is the one right before the dawn. And in his compassion, God steps in to give them a new chapter of life, a new hope, a new purpose, all through the life of this new baby boy that they're going to name John. And in his compassion, as God answers the prayer of Zechariah and Elizabeth, he simultaneously answers the prayer for an entire nation of people. You see, for 400 years, the people of Israel had been living in darkness. And what I mean by that is that 400 years prior, one of God's last recorded prophets, a man named Malachi, had spoken a prophecy that gave them hope. And yet it took 400 years for God to act on this statement. Here's what Malachi says in chapter 3, verse 1, speaking on behalf of God. "Look, I'm sending my messenger, and he'll prepare the way before me. Then the Lord you are seeking will suddenly come to his temple. The messenger of the covenant whom you look for so eagerly is surely coming, says the Lord of heaven's armies." See, that's a prophecy about Jesus. That's a prophecy about God sending a priest, a king, a Messiah, a Savior for his people. God makes that statement, and then for 400 years, God went silent. Transmission went dark. But the darkest hour is the one right before the dawn. You see, when Zechariah is standing in the holy place of the temple and he's burning this incense, a prayer, which represents a prayer offering to God, there's a crowd outside of the temple, and they are praying. And one of the prayers that they would have been praying day after day after day, generation after generation after generation, was, "God, please send this king. Please send this Messiah. Please send us the one who is going to save us." By this time, the Roman Empire was fully established, and Israel didn't have sovereignty. It was under Roman rule, dark, brutal Roman rule. It was one of the darkest hours in the nation of Israel. But the darkest hour is the one that comes right before the dawn. When the angel Gabriel showed up with this message from God for Zechariah, listen to what Gabriel said. "Don't be afraid, Zechariah. God has heard your prayer. Your wife Elizabeth will give you a son, and you're to name him John. You will have great joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the eyes of the Lord." You see, Zechariah and Elizabeth and all their people, all their family, and all their friends, they were going to rejoice with the fact that God had finally answered the prayer of bringing them a child. All the suspicion will be laid to rest. All those awkward moments and uncomfortable conversations will be a thing of the past. And so certainly the angel Gabriel is right that many people were going to rejoice because Zechariah and Elizabeth are finally going to have this son. But you know what? A big part of the reason that the people of Israel, the whole nation, was going to rejoice is that John, their son, is going to be the messenger that Malachi talked about in his text. He says, see, I am sending a messenger who is going to announce my arrival. And once he does, then I'm going to show up. So before the Messiah, before the king could come, we have to have the messenger. And John is going to be this messenger. Elizabeth's baby boy, John, is going to be God's next best step to fulfilling a vintage promise that there would be a Savior who would come for all of mankind, one who would overcome death and break the bondage of our sin. God looked at his people during this dark hour with compassion, and he said, okay, it's time. It's time for the world to know me. It's time for them to know me in a way that they can't know me unless I get up close and personal. And so God came down as a man named Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, so that we could know him, so that we could know God in a way that we would never know him if he'd not revealed himself. Now, it's going to be a short time after this scene with Gabriel and Zechariah that Gabriel has another errand he's going to run for God, and he's going to actually show up to a young girl named Mary. And he's going to tell Mary that God's about to do something that also defies all logic. In fact, it's not an answer to Mary's prayers. If Mary weren't such a faithful, God-loving young lady, it would have probably been a huge nightmare for her. Because before her wedding to Joseph, Gabriel says, before you even come together as husband and wife, you're going to be pregnant. You're going to have a baby. Hashtag serious scandal. Hashtag not in my plans. Hashtag shotgun wedding. Gabriel tells her that this child is going to be a king, and she's to name him Yeshua, which means Yahweh saves. Now today we refer to Yeshua as Jesus, which is the Latinized version of the Greek name Yeshua, but it still means the same thing. Jesus is the God who saves. His vintage compassion, God's vintage compassion, is demonstrated no better than when he left his throne in heaven to enter our story as a baby who would ultimately grow up to lay down his life for the sake of all humanity. Now, when we hear this about God, when we hear that God sent his son to rescue the world, it's easy for us to think, well, yeah, sure, that's what God does. Most of us, if we've gotten to know God of the Bible through Jesus, one of our first introductions to God was John 3:16, which says, God loved the world so much that he sent his son, that whoever believes in him would not perish, but have eternal life. And that is the lens through which we see God. Yeah, that's what God does. He sends his son. He saves the people. That's what we know. We know God as this man named Jesus, Yeshua, whose very name means God saves. Well, of course, this is who God is. This is what he does. The problem with our approach, a problem with our understanding, is that we can typically make an assumption that God kind of owed us a rescue plan, that we were entitled to his intervention in some way, that he was obligated to do something on behalf of our sin. I mean, he made us, and we're sinners, so surely he's got to show up and solve the problem. But if I were to ask you a question, what does God need to do in your life to demonstrate that he's still really God? What does God owe you? What would he have to do to confirm for you that he's still God? And you'd be like, well, God doesn't owe me anything. He doesn't have to do anything. Yet, in all of our lives, there are things, there are people, there are situations, there are dreams and goals that we have that if those things were taken away or if those things were withheld, it might cause us to begin redefining the way that we actually see God. It might begin to undermine that belief that we have about God, that he is God and he doesn't owe us anything. Because when we start having things taken from us that we felt we were entitled to, or we have dreams or goals or ambitions that never seem to come to fruition, prayers that don't ever get answered, we begin to question whether God is who he claims to be. We live in a culture today that's constantly leading us to believe that the world revolves around us. I mean, Christmas. If we don't get it right, we don't get it right. If it's not about Jesus, Christmas is about us. That's what this time of year tends to breed. The culture pushes us to have hearts that are constantly telling us that what we want and what we need is what matters most. And whether it's deliberate or not, many of us have drawn lines in the sand that if God were to cross, we kind of go, oh, well, I'm not so sure that this is a God that I want to follow. If he's not going to answer that prayer, or he's going to take this thing from me, or things aren't going to work out the way that I want them to, I'm not so sure that I can put my stock in this God. The problem is that our view of God often it gets crafted in our own image. We project who we are onto God instead of it being the other way around. We are made in his likeness, in his image. But we have a tendency to sometimes project our likeness onto God. And so listen, with this entitled culture that we live in, with this people-centered message, it's often easy for us to kind of come face to face with God's compassion, with compassion that he shows us in our lives, and just not be in awe of it, to not see it for the amazing thing that it is. We can come face to face with God's compassion and not be surprised because it's just who we assume that he's going to be. We're not overwhelmed by it because we feel like we're entitled to it. The truth is, if we want to boil it right down to its pure essence, there is nothing that we have, there is nothing that we enjoy, there is nothing that we experience that we consider pleasurable in this life that we have that doesn't come as a result of God's compassion for us. We're not entitled to any of it. But because God has compassion for us, he showers us with blessing. He showers us with pleasure. He showers us with experiences that we're not entitled to, but that come as a result of his compassion. The life of Jesus, from birth to death to resurrection, is an amazing story, and it teaches us so much about God's compassion. One of the most famous stories that Jesus ever told is a story that I believe is sent like an arrow to our hearts to teach us about compassion and to plant a seed of compassion in our hearts. And it's a story that's famously known as the story of the Good Samaritan. How many of you have heard that story, the Good Samaritan? A lot of you have. Just in case you're not familiar with that story, the Good Samaritan is a story that Jesus told, a parable, about a man who was walking down the road one day and he got mugged, beat up, robbed, and left for dead on the side of the road. And while he was laying there dying on the side of the road, a couple of people passed by. Good people, like church people. People that were like God-following people. And those people, that pair of guys, when they walked by and they saw this man laying on the side of the road, practically dying, they crossed to the other side of the road and just passed by and left him there. A third guy comes along, and he did just the opposite of what those two guys did. He actually went and raced to this man's aid. He went and he bandaged him up. He went and he took him to a place where he could be cared for and promised to care for him long term. The interesting thing is about this man who stopped to help, he was a man from a place called Samaria, hence the reason the story is called the Good Samaritan. He was of the wrong ethnicity. He was from the wrong side of the tracks, period. He had the wrong religious beliefs, and yet he had the right attitude about how to respond to this situation. In fact, Luke's text literally says that the Samaritan man had compassion for this man that was dying. Everything was wrong about this man except for his compassion. And herein lies the challenge for all of us. As we make our way through this Christmas season and we process God's compassion in our lives, we think about what we're entitled to or what we deserve versus what God has blessed us with and how much we enjoy this. The challenge for us is to kind of take this season and think about it in terms of how we might be distributors of God's compassion, how we can be the hands and feet of God in the world today, just like this Samaritan man was the hands of God and feet in that, God's hands and feet in that situation. You know, we need to be aware of the fact that you know people that aren't having a great time this Christmas season. There are so many people in our community that are struggling. There are a lot of people in our community and right here in our church who are beat up just like the man in that story. They're beat up emotionally. They're beat up relationally. They're beat up spiritually. They're beat up financially. And we have a choice to make in terms of how we approach that. Here's a question, a very personal question for you. How can you magnify God's vintage compassion through your life by showing compassion to someone else? How can you magnify God's vintage compassion through your life by showing compassion to someone else? You know, maybe there's somebody that you know who just needs a friend, and you just need to go be a friend to someone who needs a friend. Maybe there's someone that you know, maybe it's an elderly person that needs help with their Christmas shopping or some transportation. Maybe you could go help out there. Maybe you can go volunteer on Christmas Day with the United Way at the Spirit of Christmas feast and serve some people that don't have families to celebrate with and don't have meals. Or maybe there's someone that you know that you can invite to come and celebrate Christmas with you and your family and share a meal with you because they don't have a family to celebrate with. Maybe you can give a little money or give a lot of money to the Grasslands Christmas Fund so that we can ensure that the people in our community that we're connected with and the people right here in our very church are able to celebrate Christmas with some dignity and some worth. Maybe you can show compassion to someone simply by inviting them to come here with you on a Sunday morning to hear the good news about Jesus. That is showing compassion. Somewhere along the way, someone showed compassion to you, and they invited you to an opportunity to get to know Jesus. Maybe that's all God would have you do. Now, I'm going to leave the answer to those questions up to you. You know what you can do, and you probably know what you should do. What you can't do is cross over to the other side of the road and pass by like there's no one there. While you're racing off to hang another string of lights or attend another Christmas party or hit another Christmas sale, eat another pound of Christmas chocolate or pecan pie. You can't step over the people that are in need. You can't step over. You can't cross over to the other side of the road. You know, in spite of all the Christmas lights and the joyful celebrations that fill our homes, our community, even our hearts, there are people all around us that are in the dark. Someone, somewhere that you know is in the dark. And the darkest hour is the one right before the dawn. Maybe God will use you to be that first morning light in their life. Maybe God will use you to demonstrate his vintage compassion. Like John introduced Jesus to the people of his day, it's our responsibility to be messengers of hope today. It's our responsibility to make sure that people understand that Christmas isn't all just about toys and trees and electronics and pecan pie, but that it's about the arrival of a king, the arrival of the King of Kings, the arrival of the King who has the power to change everything. I'm going to pray for you, and then we'll be dismissed. Let's bow. Jesus, we acknowledge and recognize you as King. We don't necessarily always know exactly what that means because we don't live in a country or a part of the world where we submit to a king's authority or a king's leadership. But I know that as we get to know you better and we understand you better and we get to know you more personally, that you'll reveal to us in our hearts what it really means to have you as our King. And I pray that this Christmas season would be one in which we have greater acknowledgement, greater recognition just about who you are and how magnificent it is that we can know you personally, how awesome and glorious it is that you came here on earth to live the life that you did, to die the death that you did, and to beat death by coming back to life. I pray that we can celebrate that. Joy to the world, you have come. Let that fill our hearts and let us be filled with compassion because that's at the core of your heart. I pray that you bless us this week as we process these things we've studied today. Help us to have our eyes open, our ears open, and our hearts tuned to those places, those opportunities where we might be able to do just a little thing to bring a little light and a little hope into someone's life on your behalf. I pray all of this, Jesus, in your awesome, holy, wonderful name. Amen.